everyone. This is the Roundtable on Systemic Racism, Poverty, Disability Rights, and Legislation. We're here talking to Hamilton East Stony Creek candidates on these topics. But before we begin, uh, we have to talk about where we are. There's a federal election going on. Numerous things are happening, and there's so many issues going on around indigenous communities, indigenous peoples, indigenous nations, and so this is a time for us to reflect on. On how we as settlers get to talk about anti-indigenous racism and also work with and support indigenous communities and nations here in Hamilton. There's the dish with one spoon that talks about you know, taking what we need and leaving some for future generations to come later on. And so those are some of the discussions that we need to have. Um, I know folks start with land acknowledgement at HCCI, and myself personally, we talk about the issues at hand and also what you can do personally in an actionable way to start talking about these issues. The city of Hamilton has developed urban indigenous strategy that talks about recommendations that the city can take to foster indigenous solidarity and sovereignty here in Hamilton. And so, if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to read the report. As you know, there's the Truth and Reconciliation Calls to Action that's also available and it has been available for a long period of time. So if you haven't read it, I encourage you to read it and see how you can engage in meaningful discussions. The Woodlands Cultural Center is always looking for donations. So if you have money, you can definitely donate. And if you want to know more about various indigenous issues going on around what we call Canada, you can check out the Yellowhead Institute. They put out various papers, policy documents, and resources around various indigenous issues and concerns in Canada. So, having said that, we would also like to thank all our partners that collaborated on this roundtable. We have the City of Hamilton, the Department of Governmental Interrelations and Community Initiatives. We have the Hamilton Anti-Racism Resource Center. We have the Hamilton Community Legal Clinic. We have the Disability Justice Network of Ontario. We have the Hamilton Roundtable for Poverty Reduction and McMaster University School of Social Work, Dr. Emil Joseph. So we'd like to thank all our partners for working with us to have these roundtables for all the ridings in Hamilton. So today we do have two candidates. We have Nick from the NDP party, and we have Larry from the Green Party. Just so everyone is clear, we did invite the conservative candidate and the liberal candidate. Both of them were unavailable. And once again, uh, people have been asking if we invited all the candidates, and we've said that we the invitations went out to the criteria that we used was based on the leaders debates commission criteria. So those were the invitations that were sent out. So the format for today is Nick and Larry will each get 5 minutes to talk about their respective parties platform to address systemic racism, poverty, and to tackle disability rights and issues here in Canada. Once they are done, they can choose to rebut their fellow candidate on a number on the issues that were discussed. Then after that, we have three questions that we'll pose to both candidates, and then For the viewers that are tuning in, if you have questions, please use the comments section to type your question. We are live streaming on Facebook, on Twitter, and YouTube, and we're also on Facebook via the Hamilton Community Legal Clinic's Facebook page. So you can use the comment section to type your question in. So we will start with Nick. What does your party's platform present to tackle systemic racism, poverty, and disability rights? You get to go first, and then once we get to 1 minute, I will let you know.
Sure. Thank you very much. And keeping me on time is important because I'll just talk and talk. So thank you very much, first of all, Kojo, for inviting me, and Larry, and I'm glad to see that Larry's here. I have prepared remarks and notes all over the place here, but I want to diverge from those prepared remarks before I start talking about our party's platform. There are a number of crises that we face as a society. We are living through a historic time right now as we go through a pandemic. I don't have to remind people about the suffering that their families are going through, either through isolation, mental health issues, or suffering from COVID-19 itself. We're also in a climate crisis, and that climate crisis is real and growing every day, and we see the destruction that it's bringing not only to Canada, the fires, the floods, the unbearable temperatures, but we see it around the world. We're in the middle of an opioid crisis where families are suffering through addiction, whether it's opioids itself or other substances, and people are dying in record numbers. And the other crisis that we face is a crisis of equality in all forms. Race equality, gender equality, and class equality, or income inequality, as we've come to call it. And so I'm very pleased that you're holding this forum. But what I'm not pleased about, in the midst of one of the key crises of our times, is that it's only Larry and I that are here. I have to diverge, and I have to say that the two other major parties, the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party, the Conservative Party wouldn't even put the issue of race in its platform this election, and chose not to make this a priority and to show up. And the Liberal Party, like usual, talks a very good game about inequality, whether it's a racial inequality or Indigenous reconciliation or gender equality, and on it goes, and it talks about these things. These were not part of my prepared remarks, but I have to say I'm quite upset that they did not make this a priority. You will see, Larry and I will be together again on Wednesday night. They will definitely be at the televised debate, talking about all these things and willing to spend some time, providing, again, pretty words about this topic. But they're not here today to specifically deal with, a long format discussion of this issue. And it is a crisis of our time. And I want to especially thank Larry for showing up, and I want to thank the young people who have marched in the streets during a pandemic to highlight racial inequality and other forms of inequality. So let me turn to, our platform in general terms. So the New Democratic Party, from its history beginning in 1961, has been a party about the promotion of equality in all its forms. Race equality, gender equality, class equality, and not only in all its forms, but in various contexts, whether that be political equality, economic equality, and legal equality, of course. So the platform, similar to 2019 and 2021 in this election cycle, focuses on the various things that we can do to improve equality for persons with disabilities, gender equality, sexual orientation, a whole host of matters. I want to begin with racial equality. And I'd say that the underlying premise of our policy is that no one should feel excluded from their own society. And given that Canada is a multicultural, multiracial society, that includes everyone and should include everyone. And we have seen the current government talk about a number of things, whether it's racism, the RCMP, or dealing with a lawsuit where Black employees of the federal government are suing their employer because they've not been properly advanced during the course of their careers. We see that the federal government has several issues with racial equality in the first instance. And what the Democratic Party is proposing is to begin to address those issues. We are for confronting hate in all its forms and white supremacy. And just because I have the 1 minute mark, I want to point out that I have actually written a bill that is before Parliament that gets tough on hate crime, in particular hate symbols. But there are other instances, and I hope I get to talk more about this. I suppose we'll have some time later. But the other forms of inequality, gender inequality, we've seen sexual harassment in the military. We've seen the defense minister ignore sexual harassment. We've seen the prime minister exclude strong women from his cabinet. And the New Democratic Party also wishes to address those issues, in particular dealing with gender inequality and sexual harassment in the military. The government has yet again conducted another study, although it has a study from Madame Justice Deschamps. We would implement the recommendations of that study by creating an independent body where people in the military could go to launch their complaints and have them properly investigated and remedied, which is not going on in the military right now. I take it that I'm done my minute.
Yes,
so
you're
I
done.
will wrap up there, and I hope we'll have a chance to have a discussion about other issues as well.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. Next up is Larry. So you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Kojo, and I'll reiterate Nick's mention. Thank you for providing this platform for us to speak about these issues. I'll say this is my first time publicly being able to engage in a roundtable such as this, and although I find it very honorable, these topics are very important, and I'll do my best to do justice to the Green platform. In the past, many people have seen the Green platform as environment, which of course is critical and even more critical today. But their platform is very strong, coming from a very strong leader who I admired how she's handled debate and handled the questions and the tough issues throughout her campaign thus far. If you go to the greenparty.ca website /platform/just-society, you'll get to the section that talks about the issues that we're discussing today from a green future. If you break down that the platform, Green Party's broken down into 3 sections: green future, life with dignity, and a just society. And to talk about, I'm sorry about the barking dog in the background. Joys of pandemic work environments. So the Greens have talked about seeking to combat systemic racism in every public arena. There's areas that we wouldn't even think that racism exists, even just talking about environmental racism. One of the things I love about the Green platform is that in every section and almost every element, it talks about partnership with Indigenous people in those discussions, whether or not we're talking about land or environment or how we deal with truth and reconciliation. Looking at treaties and land claims, sovereignty, cultural language. I mean, I was talking to Katarina along the trail, and I'm not sure if maybe she was Serbian or Croatian, but she was hoping the house next to her, which was going to be for sale soon, would maybe somebody that from her culture might move in, because she misses that connection. And I don't think we realize how much that cultural connection matters to people. I can even look at my own connection this summer, reconnecting with my Danish roots, and then looking at how we try to take away culture and language and rights from Indigenous people with residential schools. And I've seen so many friends and relatives talking about this issue of residential schools, much more than I've seen in the past, and seeing them trying to imagine taking our own kids out of school and taking away their language. It's just heartbreaking to even think that that's something that ever happened in the past. And I think it's important to think about that for all of us, what language and what culture and what traditions mean to us. If anybody knows who Jeremy Ducher is, he's an Indigenous artist who did an album completely in his language. Talks about less than 100 people in Canada that know this language, and how important it is to protect these languages and to put money and resources into ensuring that these cultures are not lost. Of course, I talk about dismantling systemic racism in public institution, in civil services, and policing. Refugee and immigration, identity-based hate, LGBTQ, QIA plus rights, people with disabilities, of course, which Sarah in her CTV interview talked about. Still the lack of support and discussion in government and leaders and candidates about disability issues. Criminal justice reform, that are colonizing these systems, the policing and jails and their disproportionate representation in Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Our leaders need to learn about these issues. I mean, we've watched issues locally that I can't see how anybody in their right mind would make some of these decisions if they really understood, took time to read Thomas King or Desmond Cole and understand the issues that folks in our society have faced over countless generations, with a lot of lip service onto how we're going to handle these. If, as Nick mentioned, with the Conservatives even talking about it at all, we need to sit down with one another, and we need to understand how our systems negatively affect us, how comments and actions affect us, and to use that learning and to move forward together so that we can get past these issues of hate and come together as a society. And that's one thing I love about Miss Paul, is that not only does she want to cross political divide to have these discussions, she also wants to bring peace to these discussions and understanding and a way to move forward. And we need to get involved in these issues. I mean, as nervous as I am to talk today and to discuss these issues and bring justice to these discussions, as Nick says, it's one thing just to be here, right? Do your best, try to listen, try to learn. The more we talk about these issues, the easier it will be to express it in the future. I'm a former trustee and with a school board, and the more you're engaged in these discussions, the easier it is to talk about it, to defend it, and to stand up for it when we see issues of hate and whatnot in society.
Okay, thank you, Larry. And so next up, you have another 5 minutes to provide any rebuttal that the other candidate that you want to say. So we'll start with Larry, and then once your 5 minutes is up, we'll loop back with Nick. So Larry.
Well, that's the toughest part. I mean, I've watched all of your discussions this past week, and many of them have just been the Greens and the NDP. And I like what Enrique said about recognizing the people that are here in these discussions, and recognizing that the Liberals, for that faux pas, but the Green and the NDP platforms are both very strong, especially with regards to Indigenous and hate and all of these issues. So I'm not sure that I could sit here and sorry, Nick.
Can I interject just for a second?
Yeah.
I respect, Kojo, your format. And we've seen sometimes formats and debates don't always work. And I think if other people had shown up, that maybe we would have more of a rebuttal. But if we could just engage in a discussion, I would really appreciate that, because I agree with Larry that, both of our platforms reflect, I believe, a concern with the key issue of inequality, racial inequality in all its forms with respect to the issues that we're talking about today. So I just, and I don't want to spend all of my time beating up on the parties that aren't here, but it is important, I think, that we just have a discussion about some of this, because Larry mentioned Indigenous reconciliation, and because I went over on my time, I didn't discuss much of that. I just like to, if it's okay with you, that we just have a free-flowing discussion. I don't want to dominate that discussion. I just simply think that it's more productive for us to have a discussion rather than, and I also thank you for making this a roundtable. There's going to be plenty of time to debate in other forums, and I don't think the adversarial approach to this issue necessarily gets us anywhere, at least in today's forum. Sometimes that's beneficial, but I just don't think here that Larry and I have much substantive to debate without the other folks being here. So they chose not to be.
So in that spirit, I think why don't we delve into the questions, and then we can because I know the questions that we have came from Dr. Emil Joseph and the Disability Justice Network of Ontario, and in particular, the first question relates to the medical assistance in dying legislation that now is law, which was formerly known as Bill C7. And so there have been 3 special rapporteurs that have expressed concern about the medical assistance in dying legislation, in that it violates the human rights of persons with disabilities. So what do you plan to do about this deeply problematic legislation and systemic inequities that disabled people and people with disabilities face, especially in the background of the pandemic, the long-term care issues that are abound? What would you be able to do?
I guess I can.
Yeah,
I guess I
Larry,
can
you can
start.
start.
Yeah. So, I followed DGON, I see their tweets, and I see that the concerns that have been brought up with regards to assisted or MAID, sorry, just to make it simple. I'm not sure I understand them completely. I know she was talking about making sure that we have a 10-day waiting period to make sure that they're not making these tough decisions and obviously life-ending decisions and very vulnerable times. I could even go back to looking at my grandfather in the nursing home at 99, where he still had a lot of his faculties, but depression hit him, and he chose to stop eating. So he almost made himself, and he had a revelation a few days later that he was going to start eating and taking care of himself, but he passed away that night. It was too late. So we need supports for disabled people. We need supports for our elderly who are at that point are disabled. I mean, my grandfather, within a month of moving into a nursing home, was not able to walk again, and he only moved into there because he had fallen a couple times, and there just wasn't enough support in the home to be able to. He lived up until he was 95 in his own apartment, and there just wasn't the assistance for that to continue. And I know that really broke him a lot, separated him from his wife, and these are the issues that our disabled people are facing as well. And we need to make sure that mental health supports are there for them. They have other supports from their, the Green Party talks about making sure that they have the devices that they need, from wheelchairs to other assistive devices, to make sure that they have, high quality of living. So, anything that we can provide them that may be a way that is leading them towards wanting to end their life through MAID, I think we have to make sure that those supports are in place.
Nick?
Yeah, so I would echo some of what Larry's talked about. The difficulty with MAID legislation is that, on the one hand, there are individuals who want to exercise the autonomy over the end of their lives. And having the full faculties to do so, and having informed consent, and having a very careful process by which that decision is essentially approved through committee and then implemented. On the other hand, there are, of course, vulnerable people, because we're not all the same. We don't all live the same kinds of lives, who, whether through mental health issues or otherwise, may choose a path that is not in their best interest per se. If, for instance, like Larry was mentioning, and I think is common near the end of death, depression takes hold. I don't know that we're going to have a silver bullet policy manner of dealing with that tension in the legislation. Much of it, I think, rests in the administration of the legislation. I don't think we want to deny those people who are suffering the ability to end their lives, as long as it is fully informed, with fully informed consent, and as a decision not made, in haste, but certainly through the legislation is considered by the physicians and the family and the individuals have a full discussion and proceed with whatever decision they have. On the other hand, of course, we need to be concerned about our most vulnerable people in this society. So building in the ability for whether it's waiting periods or other mechanisms may make it better, but it will not end that tension. So wherever life and death is concerned, just like in this pandemic, we've seen in long-term care horrific death rates of seniors, the worst in the G7. Our party, for instance, talks about putting in national standards for long-term care. And of course, the federal government can do that and has chosen not to. We're talking about taking over at least one of the providers that is federally owned, Rivera. And we would be able, because we're in the midst of a pandemic, to do much more. I don't think that people are aware that the federal government, under our Constitution, during an emergency, during a crisis, has all the powers of the provinces during the crisis. So if the federal government wants to do more in this area to protect seniors, and unfortunately, in the midst of the pandemic and long-term care, seniors haven't even had access to the professionals that they would need to make the kinds of decisions we're talking about under MAID. So there's much more to do. I feel whenever I hear a politician say that that's an inadequate answer. There is much more to do. I just don't think that we've had very many good answers to be able to allay the legitimate concerns of folks in, who are advocates for persons with disabilities, or physicians who have share these similar concerns. But we need to be able to use the power of the state to protect vulnerable people in a much more serious way. And we've just seen a failure during this pandemic on, without hyperbole, it was a humanitarian crisis. And so that's why we have much more to do.
I mean, I would just add, and we don't have to comment on it, or you can choose to comment. For persons with disabilities and people living with disabilities, they are time and again let down, right? So I think disability advocates are not questioning that people can have autonomy over life or death. It's that it's easier to make that decision, but then harder to get access to housing, or access to healthcare, or access to income supports, right? So those are some of the concerns from disability advocates and persons living with disabilities and or disabled people, right? The next topic, and this is something that has been bubbling up for years and years, and as you know, Hamilton is known as the hate capital of Canada. We have the highest number of hate crimes per per capita. And over the years, we see hate proliferate online, in person, social media. We have hate groups here in Hamilton, Proud Boys, Soldiers of Odin. The list goes on. And these attacks, are targeted towards Black, Indigenous, and racialized folks, towards LGBTQIA folks. So, how do we tackle this pervasive and persistent issue of hate, whether it's in person or online? I know both of you touched upon it in your introductory remarks, but what specifically are you going to do to address this from a federal point of view?
Can I go first this time? Is that okay?
Sure.
Is that
Yes.
all right?
Yes.
So yeah, I touched upon it earlier. Regardless of the group or the manifestation, there, in Hamilton in particular, but also in the country at large, through the pandemic, hate crimes have gone up 3 times nationally. So there is a another pandemic going on here of hate spreading in the time of crisis. So what can we do about it? Well, our party has committed to fighting white supremacy in all its forms. And so one of the things that I've been personally involved in, because people do want specifics, and I just want to mention one specific thing I have done in my life and the NDP has done. A member of parliament who I happened to work with on an international human rights piece of legislation many years ago called me and asked for assistance in crafting a new law. And that law is Bill C-313, which is a bill that would make the display and sale of hate symbols a violation of the criminal law, and there would be appropriate penalties attached to it. I'm not sure that people are aware that throughout this country, there are businesses who will sell, for instance, Nazi swastikas for profit. It's not just the proliferation of the symbol, but that people can make profit off of that in this country. So the bill that I've helped craft with others, and that is before Parliament, before this unnecessary election was called, deals with that specific instance of people making money and profiting and displaying hate symbols. Now, of course, the bill would not, for instance, make the use of educational materials like a history class or a movie to show something about our history, World War II or whatever it is. That kind of display would continue to be illegal because there's something positive there. We need to understand our history to be able to not repeat it. But there are those specific things that we have talked about in the NDP. We've also talked about focusing on the RCMP as a policing institution. I think we already know that it has been challenged. Its commissioner initially denied the existence of systemic racism, which in 2021 seems outrageous to me. So institutions need to be reviewed. In my personal life outside of running politically, I'm a workplace investigator, and I spend my professional life investigating sexual harassment, sexual assault, and other forms of bullying and harassment in institutions. And I know that the route to solving these problems is for the institutions themselves to take it seriously, to hire independent people to investigate, and then to follow up on recommendations. And we have not seen that from this government. This government has had recommendations on how to deal with, for instance, sexual harassment in the military, and has chosen not to follow up on them. Has chosen to issue another study that might come out, in some time after an election, and maybe or maybe not, they'll choose to do something and something powerful enough to correct the problem. So whether it's the Green Party or the New Democratic Party or some other party that commits to that, serious addressing of the issue and to go forward, I think that's in terms of the political response, that is when you are going to be able to make some progress on it, because we can protest, and protesting is important, and it demonstrates the grassroots desire for real change. And I hate to use that term because it has been adulterated by politics in 2015. That change has not occurred. That change has been talked about and delayed upon. And if people choose to vote for me in Hamilton East Stony Creek, they'll know that they'll have a real advocate for that kind of change. And that's what you need to do. You need to elect people from political parties that you believe have a real desire to make that kind of change and have demonstrated that in their lives prior to running for office.
Larry?
Yeah, hi. So the Green Party has talked about using AI and partnering with groups, like yourself and other groups who have who understand these issues to determine ways that we can address online hate, that we can create intelligence that recognizes when people are expressing hate online. We see it now with COVID. We mention a vaccine or we mention anything related to the pandemic, a little disclaimer pops up. But we can go further than that. Little animated or live action shorts that kind of talk about these issues. Us being part of these conversations, we learn more about what the issues are, and like I said earlier, how to discuss this with others and debunk some of the misinformation that's out there. We're knocking on the door, and a PPC guy had chased me off the porch because his child had ordered a Green Party sign, and trying to understand that hatred to a party and probably a leader themselves. How do we have those discussions? How does that father and that child have that difficult discussion? What tools are we giving children coming up through the education system to have these conversations, and to have these conversations in a way that doesn't pass judgment, but just stops, listens to either side. We might not agree at the end what the solution or what's right and wrong, but to give each other respect in those conversations with hopes that people will learn from each other and find a solution to end hate. Because we've been talking about it for a lot of years, and I don't understand why we're here in 2021 and we're still talking about this. In what's that book by Paul Weinstein? Recently, there was a piece in that book, anyways, that discussed when my grandfather would have purchased his home back in World War II, that there was actually line items on the deeds to the house that said who you could sell to, right? It's just appalling. He talked about that back, when he tells stories about his youth and living in Hamilton. But to see it written there, to see somebody actually other than my grandfather put into words exactly what it used to say on these on deeds to homes when they were being sold is outrageous. And so that's many years ago, and here we are today still talking about these issues. I think education is key. I think we need to understand each other. I think we need to understand what our lived experiences are, because I believe if we knew what people had gone through to come here, or what say Indigenous people went through to for us to all immigrate here 100 and some odd years ago, I believe the discussion would change. Sitting on the Indigenous education circle from when I was a trustee to continuing now as a community member and listening to how they discuss their issues, there's a lot to be learned from Indigenous people. Like I said, our Green Party platform talks a lot about having them as partners in these discussions, and sitting on that committee, it's easy to see why. From talking about removing a totem pole from Parkdale Elementary School and what that totem pole meant to Indigenous people, that it wasn't even Indigenous to this Ontario, and discussing how it would be removed and what would be done with that. That discussion took about a year in itself, and you realize the importance they put into having these discussions and making sure that the solutions are made in the term that they use often in these meetings is in a good way. Having these discussions in a good way that respects all opinions and points of views, and then recognizes the people that these situations most affect. We can look at the statue downtown, and it should have been gone a long time ago. But I also respect that there's people that have some attachments to it. So, we should have a discussion. We should not just pass discussions like this off to some staff members to go away, and we should, as leaders, we should be encouraging these discussions. We should be bringing these people, both sides, together to have a no judgment, no anger discussion about how we can move forward. And I believe if we would have done something like that, say with the statue of Sir Johnny MacDonald, then it long ago would have been in 500 feet away in a museum with a full discussion about what he did to build Canada and what he did to decimate our Indigenous people. I mean, we're lucky we're not like a place like Cuba that totally decimated their Indigenous population, but we certainly have a long way to go to repair those pains we inflicted on them.
So I have we have a question from Facebook, but before I transition to that question, I wanted to ask you this, because we we hear this all the time. When you say we should have discussions, what do you mean by we should have discussions, right? Because the for folks, Indigenous communities and other people that have been doing anti-racism work, anti-hate work, right? Where will these discussions happen? Who is responsible for holding these discussions? Could you comment on that?
Yeah, and I've certainly, I appreciate that, Kojo. I hear people saying that, right? They've been having these discussions for years. I mean, we just haven't been coming to the table to join these discussions. And, let's just look at our education. I mean, residential schools were still going in 1996. I mean, I'm done in college at this point, and I don't even know they exist. This has never been discussed in our education. So there's generations of people who don't understand these issues. And I think we do, as much as we might feel like we've talked about this to death and we've gone nowhere. I mean, Indigenous education is not mandated in our education systems, right? Like there's a voluntary grade 10 course on Indigenous issues. If we're not going to step back and make sure that Canadians understand the true history of Canada, and the Green Party have talked about redoing the Citizen Guidebook to make sure that there's a more accurate history in Canada. If we don't understand what it was like for Indigenous people for us to come here and take away their languages and whatnot, we don't understand the what people who have immigrated here from other countries have had to deal with to get here, from whether it's Afghanistan or whatnot. People need to understand traditions, histories, values, because I think that's where it starts. Is it making sure that education is teaching our children to understand one another, right? Because if that's where we start, right? I mean, we can try to educate those that are older and do our best to educate them as well, but we need to start at the bottom with our children. And our education system, as a former trustee, is lacking when we can still talk about LGBTQ issues. Trying to take them out of our education or canceling an Indigenous education sessions at the last minute, so that we're not even bringing this to discussion with our children, unless there's a teacher in the school that is forward enough to talk about these issues. So,
Nick.
Yeah. So I just want to echo some of what Larry's just said. So just to share a personal anecdote. Back in the 1990s, I was taking a graduate class in law at the University of Toronto, and we had a very an internationally recognized critical race scholar, and I took his class. His name was Richard Delgado, and he and his wife taught the class together. And we came to the part where he was essentially teaching us about American history and residential schools in the United States, which had ended long before Canadian schools. And a young man in the front raised his hand and told, in error, Mr. Delgado, Professor Delgado, that Canada had those schools right up until the late 1980s. Now, in Newfoundland, it was continuing on. In any event, a world-renowned scholar almost broke down in tears before me. I will always remember this moment, because he did not understand the prevalence. Now, Granted, it wasn't his country to know these details about. But consciousness raising never ends. Okay. The concern about endless discussion, though, is something we need to address, because you will hear my party in this election over and over and over again talk about how pretty words aren't enough. We need action. So with respect to Indigenous issues, we are talking about enough talk about safe drinking water. There has been plenty of time to do it. We must do it now. And that is how we continue to build and, frankly, share a proper discussion, a nation-to-nation discussion between Indigenous people and the Crown or the federal government. Safe housing, adequate housing, on reserve and off for that matter, need to be addressed now. We're talking about affordable housing in this election as a primary issue, and we talked about it last time as well. But Indigenous people have been suffering with inadequate housing that endangers their lives for years now. And we're waking up to it because we're seeing more and more of it in our own communities. This is one of the most unequal times in Canadian history. So while we have those discussions, and I believe the educative component of legislation is often overlooked by government, because we need to raise the consciousness of people who haven't necessarily been exposed. I am subject to that as much as anybody is. I feel as an educator, I've been a law professor for 15 years. I'm always trying to learn. I'm always trying to expand the horizons, not only of myself, but of my students when I teach. And that discussion has to go forward. But at the same time, we cannot ignore that action must occur to remedy these problems. And speaking for the New Democratic Party, whether it's respectful access and non-discriminatory access to healthcare, so that we never have another incident like we did in Quebec with Joyce Echequan, or whether we're talking about the federal government abandoning, frankly, an abusive lawsuit against Indigenous children who are only asking to be treated like other children in this country. We have a prime minister who has spent $100 million on that particular fight, more than the previous conservative prime minister, Mr. Harper. And that ought to demonstrate the priorities of this government. And I'd like to add one more point to that. We know what our priorities are when we decide how much we're going to spend on those priorities to get the action and the results that we need. And this government has chosen to spend $610 million on a needless pandemic election and $100 million to defeat children in court. And I might add, denied it during a national debate. So that's how far this current government is from the kind of approach we need. And I echo what Larry says when we have to have discussion, but we also have to have action, and we need more of that action now, not tomorrow.
Yeah, there's certain things that.
So sorry, Larry. I know we're running down on time, and also somebody asked a question, and this is for the people because they they need all the information they need. So we have speaking of action, we have a question from Catherine. And Catherine is saying the housing portion based on ODSP is based on 2006 market rates. So a couple gets 1,700, with rent being 1,300 for a 1-bedroom apartment apartment. It leaves little for food and bills. So they are asking, what is your respective party going to do about provincial ODSP amounts and rates?
If I could jump in first this time, if that's okay, Nick.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, so I mean, the Green Party, first of all, talks about guaranteed livable income, and I know the NDP does as well. And it's discussed in various sections of the platform and how that would affect that specific issue. And certainly, housing is something that's recognized as very lacking in Canada. I know various neighbors that have had to move because they just couldn't afford to rent their homes anymore, being pushed out because houses are being sold and for astronomical prices, which also in turn increases their rent. The Green Party has talked about ensuring that that the new homes that we're providing in our communities also have a minimum amount, not just for low income, but making sure that they also have space, a lot of space for people with disabilities as well. So, these rents are outrageous. Our house prices are outrageous, and we need to do whatever we can to make sure that this doesn't get out of control, so that we can afford to both have not just affordable renting options, but also options for people to be able to purchase homes as well, because that's certainly getting unattainable when I look at the house prices just here in East Hamilton, over the past 14 years.
Nick?
Yeah, so just to be specific with respect to the question, work with provincial governments. So provincial governments, under our system of divided or shared responsibilities between the federal government and the provinces normally have a jurisdiction over this issue, which is not to say that the federal government is helpless here. The federal government can do, and the NDP is promising to bring that basic income to people. We're talking about beginning a Canada-wide system with persons with disabilities and seniors of about $2,200 a month, so that people can, not, and I'm not saying that they're, that this is nirvana and cures all the problems. I don't want to make that kind of statement, but this would, of course, help people in the situation like Catherine, who asked the question. That is the beginning of a process. We're talking about other aspects of affordability, because income is only one portion of it. So we're talking about building income supports, and we're talking about fair wages, increasing the minimum wage, the federal minimum wage, from $15 to $20 an hour, and a whole host of other things like pharmacare, which would take the cost of many people, the medication that they work and they struggle, but they can't afford it. They can barely afford rent or whatever else. So a bundle of things to provide income supports to raise people to a level where they can begin to have more of a life with dignity and not struggling in poverty. But I want to add that that's the expenditure or investment side that the NDP talks about when it talks about providing these things. It seems to me to be not the most effective approach if we're simply going to borrow to fund those programs. There are 44 billionaires who over the course of a year have made over $78 billion cumulatively. And those people need to pay more taxes so that we can fund more income supports and we can properly fund basic income for all, because we're starting and we're focusing first on seniors and persons with disabilities, but we want to be able to build that out to everyone. And we'll all remember that there was a pilot project that the provincial government promised would not be affected when they came to power, and then was ended, so that the critical information that study was gathering so that we could implement an effective system has been sidetracked. And if we were to get into power, we would certainly go forward in that direction of having a basic income for everyone, starting with the two groups I've mentioned.
Okay. All right. Catherine, I hope I hope they answered your question. So we have okay. Catherine says thank you both for your answers. So we have about 6 minutes, and so what I wanted to do, we're ending at 2 o'clock, and I have to give some information about advanced polling today. So what I wanted to do was give you both maybe 2 minutes to share with the audience, if you were elected, what would be your first piece of legislation that you would put forward, because part of being an MP is you get to write bills that become the law here. So what kind of legislation do you see yourself bringing to the House of Commons if you were elected? So we'll start with Larry and we'll end with Nick.
Yeah, I think proportional representation. Our existing government talked about a lot during a couple of elections ago, but that discussion seemed to die as soon as they were elected. And I truly believe that election reform would help us achieve some of these more social issues that, like guaranteed livable income and, truth and reconciliation and all these important things that we discuss every election, but trying to elect a party that is serious about these issues, and not just having a discussion like Nick says, making sure that we're acting on things like guaranteed livable income and drinking water, adequate housing, and these important issues, because if we have a government that's elected based on true representation of what our votes are, then I believe we would always have a very left-leaning representation in government that would allow us to move forward on these issues. I sat on, like I said, the IEC. I've worked with the kids with mental health issues during my time as trustee as well, and we have to. We have to be strong on these issues. We have to make sure that these supports are in place, and we need to do whatever we feel could most help us move towards making sure that we're not just talking about these issues anymore. They're in place, and people are living in dignity in a just society.
Okay, thank you, Nick.
So there are three pieces of legislation that I dream about being able to introduce into the House. One is a piece of legislation that I have written already, and which the House voted on in the last Parliament before the 2019 election was called. And that was a bill that, on the basis of international human rights, international workers' rights, and environmental justice, would have allowed people from other countries to come to Canada and sue Canadian corporations who went overseas and violated their rights, and to have a process which advances the cause of human rights, workers' rights, and environmental justice around the world. So that when we prohibit Canadian companies from acting badly here, we simply don't turn a blind eye when we send those corporations around the world to mine, for instance, in various places of the world, and then frankly act badly, act horribly. And then because some of these countries don't have developed legal systems and no real recourse to justice, those abuses are left unremedied. So I want to be able to do that here to promote international human rights, workers' rights, and environmental justice. Another environmental measure that I would begin to develop as a member of Parliament is what is sometimes called a border adjustment. I call it what I believe it is, which is a green tariff. Our manufacturers, our employers that produce goods and sell them overseas have a regulatory requirement to comply with environmental regulations here that other corporations around the world do not have to abide by, and yet they have to compete on an unfair basis. And what I would like to do is even the playing field, so that the steel company that has to pay attention to the environmental regulations here in Hamilton, for instance, is competing on the same basis as one in Malaysia or China, and that would both foster a cleaner environment and fairer trade, so that employment would be increased in Hamilton East Stony Creek, for instance. There's one more piece of legislation that right now, because I'm a little bit older than both of you, I think, I'm having trouble recalling. Bankruptcy. I'm sorry. I've worked on this issue in my professional life. Often when there's a bankruptcy, workers show up in line last and find out when they get to the front of the line, the cupboard is bare. So what I would like to do, and this imperils a number of things, pay equity payments, pension payments, so that people work their whole lives and find that their pensions are reduced or there is no pension as a result of poor bankruptcy laws. And what I would like to do is to develop a system for small creditors like workers, small businesses who are often left without remedies, remedies that actually fulfill the debts that are owed to them. And when a worker doesn't get their pay, that's felt much more than when the bank doesn't get their money. So that would deal with the priority of bankruptcy that workers face and small businesses face, as well as the option, like in some other countries like the United States, of providing insurance so that we insure that workers get all of their debts properly paid, because it should not be the most vulnerable in our society that pay the heaviest price for things like bankruptcy. And we should secure people's incomes, making sure that they have their pensions and the other payments that they worked their lives for be provided. And we can do that through better bankruptcy legislation. So those are the three things I'm thinking about if I ever have the honor of representing the people in Hamilton East Stony Creek.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you to all our viewers for tuning in. So yes, we targeted the 1 hour mark. We are close to the 1 hour mark, and so the final word before we let everybody go is that today is the last day of advanced polls. So they are open till 9 p.m. And again, all the candidates that are running in Hamilton East Stony Creek. I'm reading the list from the Elections Canada website. So this is straight from Elections Canada. We have Chad Collins for the Liberal Party of Canada, Ned Courig for the Conservative Party of Canada, Nick Milanovich, New Democratic Party, Larry Patterson, Green Party of Canada, and Mario Ricci, People's Party of Canada. So those are the individuals that are going to be on the ballot at advanced polls today. They close at 9 p.m. You can check the Elections Canada website to find the closest advanced poll near you. And election day is September 20th. If you have any questions, you can also reach out to the Chief Returning Officer. They have offices across the city. You can reach out to them for any support, accommodation, language. If you need stuff translated, all of that, you can reach the Chief Returning Officer, and they'll be able to support you. So thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you,
We
Kojo.
we
Thank you,
wish
Larry.
you we wish you all the best.
Thank you both.
And thank you to all our partners. I have to list them out. They are long: City of Hamilton, Government Interrelations, Community Initiatives, the Disability Justice Network of Ontario, the Hamilton Anti-Racism Resource Center, McMaster School of Social Work, Dr. Emil Joseph, and the Hamilton Community Legal Clinic, and the Afro Canadian Caribbean Association of Hamilton. Our last roundtable is tomorrow. Tomorrow at 6 o'clock, we'll be talking with Vito Scroll from the Liberal Party of Canada, and Lauren Newick from the New Democratic Party. So we'll see you again tomorrow at 6 p.m. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you, Nick and Larry.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Kojo. Thanks, Larry. See you Wednesday.